Dave, I'm so excited to talk to you because longevity is on the top of everyone's mind. And with this podcast, we talk about mind and how mind changes the brain and the body. There's so much talk in our current day and age about health span versus just increased lifespan. You've spent over 25 years focused on one molecule. So what is the molecule and what made it worth that kind of level of commitment?
It's a pleasure to speak with you about this amazing molecule called astaxanthin, which is actually, it's a naturally occurring marine molecule that's present in microalgae and salmon and shrimp. And it's actually what gives salmon their beautiful pink and red coloration. And it turns out, though, that in addition to just being a pigment, it's a really powerful and really unique antioxidant and anti-inflammatory that turns out is systemically distributed throughout the whole body. Microalgae are green when they start off life. And then when the sunlight hits them and stresses them, they produce astaxanthin as a defense mechanism to shield them against the UV light and the damaging effects of the sun. And then from there, it works its way up the food chain. And so the scientists had this really great technology to grow this microalgae. And at the time, there was only maybe less than 200 peer-reviewed papers. There were no human clinical studies, but there were some intriguing hints in the research demonstrating that it's a powerful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and exceptionally safe. For the salmon, it's not just giving them their color, but it's giving them strength and vitality. And without it, they probably wouldn't be able to swim upstream in that amazing, strenuous journey to reproduce. Because ultimately, they're swimming against the currents. They're not really consuming food. They're basically wasting away in this miraculous journey upstream. And the astaxanthin helps to protect their muscles against damage as they're swimming upstream. And then ultimately, the salmon, when they lay their eggs, the astaxanthin is transferred to their eggs. And that's why the eggs are red as well. And it protects the eggs against the UV light in the shallow waters where the eggs are laid, and then ultimately in the development as well. And so given that astaxanthin had all these effects and was prevalent in shrimp and crab and lobsters and krill and whales, flamingos, these different species, we thought, wow, like this is amazing. And rather than just looking at this as something that maybe you could feed to farm-raised salmon to help them be pink, because that's in the case of farm-raised salmon, they're actually fed astaxanthin as part of their diet rather than being artificially dyed pink. Some people think that, but they actually consume astaxanthin as part of their feed. But we thought, okay, that's interesting, but given all of these benefits, like what if we actually brought this out as a supplement? And so back in the 1999 and 2000 timeframe, we and the company across the street from us, which was also doing similar microalgal production, both launched the first two astaxanthin dietary supplements in that time frame, 1999, 2000. And it was just in Hawaii. There wasn't really much knowledge around it, but that really started us on the journey. And for the next decade, we actually pivoted and looked at pharmaceutical research of astaxanthin, analogous to the omega-3 space, where you have supplements and you have prescription forms. And so we were looking at a highly pure, highly bioavailable form and looking at higher doses for cardiovascular and other disease applications. And so we did a lot of really cool research looking at how it gets into cells and cellular membranes and what it does on certain pathways, and then the outcomes with various proof of concept studies. And we're doing that for many years. And then ultimately came back to the supplement space, bringing the learnings of the pharmaceutical manufacturing rigor and the research, and then brought that back into the supplement form in recent years. So that's been the journey. And there's now more than 4,000 peer-reviewed papers and 100 human clinical studies. We've contributed to that, but it's just been internationally researched as well. And so it's been great to see this skill get so much attention in the research world, but it hasn't really made it into the mainstream in terms of general awareness. But it should be as well known as omega-3s, probiotics, multivitamins, because of its really amazing properties.
Wow. I didn't realize it was multi-systemic, and then also that it gave the pink color to salmon. It was fascinating when I was reading up about it and doing the research for the interview about how it helps the salmon swim upstream. And I didn't realize the eggs keeps the eggs pink. And also that's amazing that you spent the time in the clinical world looking at the applications for cardiovascular health and all kinds of things. How does it help with the cardiovascular system? Or any other, what was the sort of research that they were focusing on?
Yeah. So at the time, this was in the kind of early to mid 2000s. We were really focused on cardiovascular applications. And it turns out that astaxanthin, when you ingest it orally, it gets taken to your liver and then gets packaged into lipoproteins. So you'll find it in VLDL, LDL, HDL, et cetera. And those lipoproteins are susceptible to oxidation, to oxidative damage. And when that happens, because the last 20 or so years, the shift has occurred from just LDL being bad cholesterol, HDL
Yes.
being good cholesterol, and it
Yeah.
all being about just having the right LDL or HDL types of numbers. It turns out that there's the quality of the lipids. For instance, if your LDL is oxidized, then it can trigger an immune response and you get foam cells, plaque buildup that's prone to rupture based on the oxidized LDL. And
Wow.
in addition to that, even if your lipids are perfectly managed, you can still have elevated systemic inflammation. And if you can reduce that inflammation separately, even if your lipids are perfect, if you can keep your inflammation down, you can have a significant impact on major adverse cardiovascular events. There was a study conducted by Novartis several years ago showing with an anti-inflammatory drug that had no impact on lipids in a population that had their lipids under control, but they had elevated inflammation as measured by HS-CRP, that if they reduce CRP below 2, they could reduce major adverse cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes by 25% just by reducing the inflammation independent of lipid management. So going back to astaxanthin, we have data in both animals and humans in a study that we conducted showing that we can reduce not just LDL, but oxidized LDL. And so that's a major benefit to cardiovascular health. In animal studies, as part of the pharmaceutical research, we had several different studies in different species showing that we could prevent blood clots, both primary and secondary occlusion of arteries. And so that was a really interesting finding. And then also we did a study looking at plaque buildup in the arteries, and we could image for that. And we saw a significant reduction in the aortic arch plaque with the astaxanthin as well. We've also seen reductions in triglycerides, increases in HDL, and reductions in HS-CRP, a measure of systemic inflammation often associated with cardiovascular health. So those are all really important benefits that we've seen in the cardiovascular space.
I'm so glad you mentioned about the LDL, HDL thing, because the whole lipid story has been really blown out of proportion slightly. So it's getting more balanced now. And that's the oxidated LDL, that's the issue. And I can never say the astaxanthin really does help with reducing that from these studies, which is incredible. Is it a does it take a long time? Is it?
Yeah. So in these studies, they were like 3 months of dosing,
Okay.
both in
Oh,
animals
that's
and humans.
great.
And that's typically if you're trying to get your blood work done, you're probably not getting it done more than every 3 months.
And
So
yeah,
you probably
yeah.
want to take it and then check it at each upcoming blood check, your biomarker diagnostics. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. But yeah, I think that's a good amount of time to allow the astaxanthin to absorb into your system and start to impact the systems related to oxidative stress and inflammation.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
That's fascinating that you talk about the 3 months. And just to quickly come back to wrapping up for the people. So if it's helping with the oxidized LDL and it's helping with preventing blood clots, these are major things to get your cholesterol levels correct and to also get if you do battle with blood clotting. What's also interesting is because some people do react to things like statins and things. So is your research showing that this is potentially an alternative or it plays a support role to things like statins and so on to help
Yeah.
control cholesterol?
And so just to clarify, we've done both pharmaceutical research and we've done studies in the supplement space. And so we can't make claims that we can treat cardiovascular disease or prevent blood clots with the
Absolutely.
supplement form. But those were pathways that we were pursuing on the pharmaceutical side with high doses of the astaxanthin molecule. On the supplement side, we did see the reduced sized LDL. And so, yeah, we haven't tested it instead of statins. The study we did in the supplement space actually had real world cardiovascular subjects that had cardiovascular disease or risk factors for it. And they were already on all the standard of care medications. So they were on statins. And this was a randomized, double blind, placebo controlled trial. And so just on top of their standard of care, we gave them either placebo or a low or a high dose of astaxanthin. And then on top of that standard of care, we got the reductions in the oxidized LDL, the LDL, blood pressure, et cetera. So that was really exciting to see.
So you're basically showing that it's playing a supportive role. And that's what you say if you look at your site and so on, you talk about it playing a supportive role. So it's not replacing something, but it's supporting. And that's really fantastic that it's actually doing that.
I'll just mention that it would
Yeah,
be
go ahead.
interesting to see because a lot of times in clinical research, you have the ethics of withholding standard of care.
Exactly.
And so you don't want someone to be worse.
No.
While it would be interesting to see in like a statin naive or kind of other population that is not medicated, just to see what impact we'd have. But we just tried to take real world people that are already on standard of care and see if we had a benefit there. So it certainly can be a good supportive benefit for cardiovascular health and other aspects of health in addition to what people are doing. Fortunately, in the human studies, there haven't been demonstrations of any conflicts with other medications. And for instance, even in the animal studies, when we saw the reductions in the blood clots, we didn't see increases in bleeding time or blood thinning. And so it wasn't
So
just
that's
thinning out
good.
the blood to prevent the clot. It was actually impacting the pathological situation and the oxidative stress and inflammation that was triggering the kind of clotting. And so it was getting rid of the pathological clotting situation, but not your normal wound healing type of response. And so that was really fascinating to see the safety with
Yeah.
the efficacy there.
And it's interesting about the 3-month thing, because also with you are working on a thought pattern, which is what the predominant thing that we talk about in this podcast. We know that our mind affects our brain and body, basically 63-day cycles,
Mhm.
which is it's more or less 3
2
months.
3 months.
And that's also stem cells. So it's interesting that it's always these interesting cycles of around about 3 months to see some sort of change happening. And then you also mentioned about the inflammation. And I think most people who are into understanding anything about wellness in this day and age understand wherever there's inflammation, there's potential for disease. So this is a big thing about the astaxanthin, isn't it? Anti-inflammatory effects.
So its fundamental mechanism is it gets into your cells and then gets into the membranes. So the lipid bilayers, like the outer membrane of the cell, the plasma membrane,
Mhm.
but also the membrane around the nucleus, which
Oh,
houses your
wow.
DNA, and then also
Yeah.
the membranes of the mitochondria, which produce
Oh.
all of your energy. And as a
Mhm.
byproduct of that energy production, you have exhaust or pollution
Yeah.
byproducts, reactive oxygen species that can be created as a normal function of energy production. And you have built in endogenous antioxidant systems. But as we age over time, lifestyle factors, environmental factors, your internal defenses can become weakened. And so when you have too many of these reactive oxygen species, often they're referred to as free radicals, where they
Mm.
are these forms of oxygen that are missing an electron. They have an unpaired electron. They're trying to steal an electron from something else. So they can steal it from the lipids in your membranes, from the proteins that basically are responsible for all the functions of your cells, or the DNA itself. And so it can damage any of these components, which are the building blocks of your cells, that are the building blocks
Mm.
of all of your tissues and organs and everything that we are. And so if you think of it as a house, if your walls and your floors, your furniture, everything is being attacked and degraded, that's not good for the lifespan and the health span of the house of your body. And astaxanthin, it turns out, gets into those membranes, but actually perfectly spans the membrane from end to end. Based on its chemical structure, it anchors into the inner and outer edges of the membrane and basically perfectly intercalates into and across that membrane, which is comprised of phospholipids. They have phosphate heads
Mm.
on inner and outer side of the membrane and lipid kind of fatty acid tails on the inside. And astaxanthin just locks in. It has this long backbone and these ring groups on the end of the molecule that anchor across the membrane, lock into those phosphate groups and align with those lipids. In that situation, in that location, it can fight off those reactive oxygen species, those free radicals, and actually give up an electron in place of the lipids or proteins or DNA that would be damaged by having electrons stolen. Astaxanthin can give an electron, can donate it to free radicals, neutralize that free radical in its tracks so it's not creating any more damage. But astaxanthin doesn't become reactive. It can sustain the blow of giving up that extra electron, and ultimately it can get recharged by vitamin C, which comes along outside in the aqueous environment of the cellular environment and
Mm.
gives an electron back to astaxanthin. And then vitamin C gets recharged by glutathione, one of your body's master antioxidants. And so they kind of work in harmony. But astaxanthin stops those reactive oxygen species right in their tracks. So each one of those lipids, when it becomes oxidized, it steals an electron from its next door neighbor. And then the next one, it's this domino effect. And so it's like a wildfire cascading through your
Mm.
membrane that without astaxanthin being there to stop it, could cause a lot of damage to the integrity of your membranes, the integrity of your cells, like the walls of your house crumbling, which impacts what goes in and what goes out, bringing glucose in to create energy and sending signals out. All these types of things are
Mm.
impacted if your membranes are damaged. And so astaxanthin protects these membranes. And compared to other antioxidants that may get into the membrane, they don't anchor across it. They could disrupt the integrity of the membrane, even though they're in it, but they're not perfectly slotted in. Or other antioxidants don't even get into the membranes. They're sitting outside in the aqueous environment and they can't. And so with this, it's a really powerful antioxidant, but it's in all of those membranes of the cells. And like we talked about earlier on, it's distributed systemically. So it hitches a ride on these lipoproteins, from your liver to your heart to your brain, all throughout your body, and then gets into all of these cells and all of these locations. And when you prevent that oxidative stress, those reactive oxygen species, those free radicals from damaging those cells, you have much better chance of your cells functioning normally. And then you can have a normal immune response, fight off infections, wound heal, but you don't trigger the inflammatory pathways from this oxidative stress environment. Because if you have oxidative stress, your immune cells sense that, and you have kind of like first responders, like your emergency crews, your military coming in to fight the foreign invaders that are attacking you. But oftentimes, if you have internal problems, it tries to address that, but then the problem is that inflammation can stay turned on and continue to attack your cells and basically break down a lot of your healthy tissues and organs, different issues with cardiovascular health or cognitive decline or joint or muscle function, all of these things, gut health, et cetera. All these things can often be driven by oxidative stress and inflammation, which are interconnected at the cellular level. And so astaxanthin is able to prevent that kind of pathological bad activation of the inflammation, the chronic inflammation that can degrade these tissues over years and decades, but not prevent the normal immune response that's there to help you, protect you against infections and bacteria, viruses, fight off those things, and also heal wounds. So your normal immune response is intact, but your pathological, unwanted internal chronic inflammation can be attenuated. So that's why it's really interesting that astaxanthin has these impacts. And we have data showing reductions in a lot of these common inflammatory markers. And so some drugs go after TNF alpha, for example. These are big like rheumatoid arthritis drugs. There's data with the astaxanthin showing reductions in TNF alpha. There's reductions in COX-2, prostaglandin E2, which is target of aspirin. So a lot of these anti-inflammatory drugs go after certain downstream targets of inflammation, but astaxanthin works upstream, preventing the activation of the pathway, and then as a result has an impact on a lot of these downstream targets that other agents may go after. And so that's what's so interesting.
So it's like a warrior that is not doing damage. So it prevents the autoimmune. It must have an impact on autoimmune responses because, as you say, the immune system can be activated and then overactivated and then attacking your own system. So it's helping with that process as well, which also has a whole huge in autoimmune, creating so much inflammation as well. And it's preventing the downstream effect. So it's more effective than your normal antioxidants, or it makes them more effective because it's locking in over the whole cell membrane as opposed to just floating around in the aqueous area or getting inside in the wrong places. It's actually blocking over and helping to prevent the autoimmune response and helping to prevent the inflammation and it can release electrons so which doesn't damage it. So it neutralizes the oxidative effects. It's fascinating. Wow,
Exactly.
It's quite a little powerhouse, isn't it? It's quite a little powerhouse. That's amazing. Just to go to the next study, there was an interesting NIH study, and I know that was done on mice, but I just wanted everyone to note that a lot of the work that you've been doing is on people as well. So we talk about having a 12% effect, where you can explain the NIH study, but that was done on mice, which is it's still data. But you also, there has been studies done on humans, which is really important for people to know.
Of course. Yeah. And so ideally, it'd be great to test everything in humans. But the challenge is, like in the case of longevity and specifically lifespan, to see how long a human will live if you started dosing is going to take years and ultimately decades. And so it's not feasible to conduct a lifespan study when you're really trying to figure out what agents work, what's the dosing, how is it impacting these aging longevity mechanisms. And so that's why the mice have been a great model for lifespan, because they're still a mammal like humans, but they only live a few years. And so it's still a long time to conduct a study. It's not 3 months, it's 3 years to conduct a study, but you still get data in a relevant organism that is hopefully somewhat relatable to humans. And in this particular NIH study, they utilize genetically heterogeneous mice that are more representative or translatable to humans, rather than a lot of basic research that's done in mice is done with these genetically inbred mice that are not very relevant for something complex like aging, an impact on a very specific thing, but it's not representative of the overall organism, the biological systems in something like aging. And so these genetically heterogeneous mice were bred specifically for this study, and it's conducted at 3 different research institutions at the University of Michigan, the University of Texas, and the Jackson Labs in Maine. And you have thousands of mice that form a cohort each year that is started with a handful, maybe 5 or 6 promising longevity agents are selected based on their preliminary research to see if they could have an impact on lifespan in these mice. And they have a control group where they're just eating normal chow. And then they have the other treatment groups where they're eating the normal chow that is basically spiked with the agent. Like in our case, it was astaxanthin that we supplied. And it was based on research showing that astaxanthin extended lifespan research model organisms like worms and flies and yeast. And in addition to that, had impacts on pathways related to longevity, like mTOR, which is the target of rapamycin, which is a longevity agent that's highly touted, AMPK, the sirtuins, and ultimately FOXO3, which was a really interesting study that we conducted in collaboration with the University of Hawaii. And there's some really talented researchers there dedicated their careers to looking at aging. And in this study called the Honolulu Heart Program, thousands of Japanese American men were followed for decades from like the 50s, 60s onward. Doctor's visit was tracked. Every lab biomarker results was tracked, why they got sick, why they died. And based on genetic testing of the samples in that population, the individuals that lived the longest that had a particular form of the FOXO3 gene that was kind of like the most activated form of that gene. And humans all have this gene, but there's different versions. And if you had that right version, you were the most likely to live to 100 healthy. And we thought, I wonder if astaxanthin would have an impact on this anti-aging gene that's been replicated in other human populations as well. And it turns out in this clinical study that astaxanthin did increase the FOXO3 activation by 90% in the cardiovascular tissue of mice. And so that was really exciting because it's a really established anti-aging gene or pathway. And so the investigators at the NIH program called the Interventions Testing Program saw this data and said, we'd love to test your molecule in our study. And so we supplied it to them. And after the whole several years of examination, that the mice were started when they were middle-aged, like the human equivalent of being in your 40s, perhaps. And it turns out that first off, the females already lived like 10% longer than the males, which is consistent in general in nature. This allowed the males to essentially catch up to the females. The females still ended up living a little bit longer. Their lifespan was extended a little bit, although not statistically significantly, but still numerically longer lifespan than the males. But the males actually got a lot closer to the females, which was interesting. So for the women out there, if there's men in your lives, hopefully it can allow them to live a similar lifespan and also improve your health span. But I will say that for instance, that cardiovascular human study that we conducted, that was in males and females where we saw reductions in the oxidized LDL, blood pressure, et cetera. Other human studies, other animal studies, benefits in males and females. But for aging itself, there are some intersex differences, hormonal differences that impact lifespan. And so it seems that astaxanthin has an impact on some of those things related to lifespan itself in the males. And it probably helped the females be slightly healthier, which extended their lifespan a little bit as well. But it had a little bit more of an impact on the lifespan aspect itself in the males. But that was really interesting because in this NIH program, which is probably the gold standard model of lifespan testing in a mammal, there have only been 10 agents or so that have extended lifespan at all with statistical significance. And of those, maybe 5 that have had a lifespan increase of more than 10%. And everything else that has worked have been things like rapamycin or other repurposed drugs, if you will, that are not like supplements that are broadly accessible and safe and easy to take. These are things that you may not want to be taking every day because of side effects or other things. It may extend your lifespan, but are you impacting your health span? That's still to be determined. With astaxanthin, there was an increase in the lifespan, but you have the excellent safety profile where in both humans and animals, it's been shown to be exceptionally safe for long durations, also high doses, and it's broadly accessible. And importantly, we have data in cardiovascular, in cognitive, joint, muscle, all of these things. And so you're really impacting health span, which is the big thing. It's not so much, can I live a few extra years? It's, can I improve the quality of my years, however many I have? And if I can have more along the way, that's fantastic.
And that's where we started the interview was we want health span. We don't just want to be living longer, but you're unhealthy and to do everything one can. So let's talk about 2 things I want to talk about before we wrap up is, can you summarize nice and simplistically what the science is, the overarching effect, just in a couple of sentences? Then I would want to talk about stress and unmanaged stress. So quick summary of the benefits. I know people have heard a lot of words and a lot of science, and I love it. And a lot of the people that follow this podcast love it, but I think a wrap-up will be wonderful, a summary wrap-up.
So this is a natural molecule that when taken orally is distributed throughout your whole body. It gets into all your tissues and organs. your heart, your brain, your liver, gets into the cells and protects your cells from oxidative stress, from damage by free radicals and reactive oxygen species that can damage the integrity and the function of your cells. And if you can reduce that oxidative stress, you can have healthier tissues and organs, and you impact important pathways related to inflammation and aging. And so you can have reductions in not just oxidative stress, but reductions in chronic inflammation and beneficial impacts on longevity promoting pathways like autophagy, like cleaning up the junk in your cells, producing more mitochondria, the energy power plants of your cells. And so all of these things can be beneficially modulated with astaxanthin. And essentially, it's not all gas or all brakes. It's restoring balance and homeostasis and normal function to your cells. So we're not trying to do something that is superhuman. It's just trying to restore normal human health to your cells, because everything we're doing with aging is pulling us off track. Poor diets, lack of sleep, lack
Yeah.
of movement and activity, stress, all of these things can pull us off track of being just healthy and functioning normally, reducing that oxidative stress and inflammation in your cells throughout your body in a way that's very unique from other antioxidants and other anti-inflammatories and other longevity agents.
Now, we live in a world where stress has been very maligned as being a bad thing, and stress is actually good for us. But if it's unmanaged, it becomes really bad. We react to stress or perceive stress is mind-based. It's how we are looking at something, and our mind is our thinking, feeling, and choosing, because mind is 99% of who we are, and it controls the brain and the body. But as I said right in the beginning, we've got to have a healthy brain and body that the mind can work through. So when we have unmanaged stress, I've seen from my research that's going to affect all the biomarkers in the body, and we know that it affects people's ability to function, their mental health, etc. We all know that's not something new. But what I've shown with my research is that when we manage our mind, we make stress work for us and not against us, then we see massive changes in biochemistry and biological functioning that relate to all this autoimmune health, cardiovascular health, immune health, cardiovascular health, etc. And so I wanted to ask about the role, because you mentioned, as you already mentioned in your beautiful summary, is that the pathways of inflammation that lead to aging and so on, we're going to age, but we don't have to age so quickly. And we are aging quickly because of the lifestyles that we lead. So we've got to look after our physical brain and our body. And to do that, we've got to get our mind. So in terms of the relationship, we know stress. So having said all of that, how do you see, am I saying it right? I can never say, I want to.
Yeah, it's the X in there that makes it really hard. But if you break it
It's an
down
X.
into astaxanthin, then it's a little bit easier.
Astaxanthin. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah,
Beautiful.
you got it.
Astaxanthin. Okay,
Mhm.
astaxanthin. So astaxanthin is then playing some level of a pretty strong support role in helping us to manage stress, if I understand you correctly. Can you talk a little bit around stress and astaxanthin?
Yeah. So, like you said, some stress can be good. You can have hormetic stress that can trigger healing pathways. If you have some stress, your body can be to produce more antioxidants. And when you exercise, that is a good stress, and your body hopefully
Mhm.
recovers if you're doing the right rest and recovery. And so you can rebuild. It's just when you have chronic stress, whether it's psychological, environmental factors, or things, because your body is just a highly
Mhm.
sensitive machine that's sensing things from your food, from your environment,
Exactly.
from your thoughts, and reacting to those. And so if it's too much, it overwhelms your systems. A little bit is good, and your systems respond and stay alert and rebuild. That's a good thing. But if it's too much, then these systems break down over time. If you just ran a marathon every single day, that would be
Mm.
too much. Like, you need to recover and you need to have support to heal. And so something like with the brain, where psychological stress can have a significant impact on all types of things, inflammation and hormonal levels. And with that, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So it gets into your brain, which is a privileged location. A lot of things don't get there, which is a good thing. Your brain is meant to keep out things that could be toxic and bad to your brain. But your brain is a very lipid-rich environment and oxygen-hungry machine, because it's producing a lot of energy. And so these lipids are highly susceptible to oxidation. And if you can get astaxanthin into your brain, it can protect those lipids in that oxygen hungry environment. And so whether it's psychological stress or other kind of drivers of stress, astaxanthin can help to reduce the downstream effects. And this can impact cognition. There's human studies with astaxanthin showing the impacts on information processing and memory and focus, but also like in animal studies looking at neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. And so things that are really important for cognitive function. And if you think about the diseases of aging and cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all of these things, there is an oxidative
Mm.
stress and inflammatory component
Yeah.
that drives these things. And so if you can have something that's safe, that's on board, that reduces the oxidative stress and ultimately the inflammation that can wreak havoc, that can be such a profound benefit.
So working on your mind and then having that extra support system in the brain that the mind has to work through, it's a tremendous supportive role. Let's be honest, the supplement industry is flooded. I've been using this for a while. I love it. So how is this different? It's a crowded environment, the supplement industry. People can be skeptical. You're not saying that this is some magic bullet that you take this and everything's going to go away. What can you say about that? About this as another supplement within the supplement industry, not being a magic bullet, but I think you pretty much
Yeah.
laid the foundation, but how would you answer that question?
Yeah, there's several layers to that question because, first of all, you have supplements versus pharmaceuticals. And so you have the rigor of pharmaceuticals that have very large scale clinical studies that are
Mhm.
approved for certain disease indications.
Mhm.
And you have some supplement companies that either don't know the rules or don't care, and they'll make illegal claims that they treat
Exactly.
diseases or prevent arthritis or whatever it may be, which is only reserved for pharmaceutical drugs, which a drug versus a supplement is not molecularly necessarily different. Anything can go through whatever regulatory pathway. It's a matter of the clinical trial data, like proving that it
Mhm.
works in a large scale human study or studies that the FDA agrees this can be prescribed for this disease area. And you have typically better manufacturing. Safety is more well understood. So doctors are often more comfortable with pharmaceuticals. But in the last several years, supplements have come a long way. I think there's been a lot more rigor around the manufacturing and the data, a lot more research. And so a lot of doctors, like we've reached out to thousands of doctors over the years and other healthcare professionals and went through the science and the manufacturing and the data. And they often are really excited to utilize something like this in their practice. And so I think it's an educational process to educate healthcare professionals and health conscious consumers about the difference between supplements and drugs, but also that there is important science and rigor with supplements. You just have to understand that supplements don't necessarily have the same amount of rigor as a phase 3 approved pharmaceutical drug. But then in the supplement space, you have all types of things. There's so much noise. There's all these different types of things that you can do, therapy, protocols, and supplements, and different things. You sometimes get a lot of hype around them just because maybe there's some famous scientist or some celebrity or some press or some big company that's putting millions of dollars into marketing that makes it seem like a big deal. But sometimes the data can be cherry picked from one study that's not representative of a lot of
Mhm.
studies. And so you have to try to look at the totality of the evidence and see, are these studies well run? Does it look like they're promoting an anomaly of a result? And so with something like astaxanthin, you have a lot of data, and it's not just conducted by us, it's conducted by thousands of researchers across the globe. And so you have that reproducibility of efficacy across a lot of different research institutions and real world applications where you get people talking about their benefits with the supplement uses. And then if you look at the longevity space, antioxidant space, there's lots of things promoted for that. But for longevity, to demonstrate efficacy in that ITP NIH program is really the gold standard for mammalian lifespan. And no other supplement has demonstrated that type of efficacy that we have. And so from a lifespan standpoint, that was something that sets astaxanthin, and in particular the form that we supplied, apart from any of the other longevity kind of supplements. And not to say that they don't have interesting science or that they
Mhm.
may not have utility, but things like even some omega-3 products, green tea, NAD related precursors were tested in this NIH program and did not extend lifespan. Or resveratrol, which has been really popular
Mm.
for many years,
Yeah, for
was
years.
tested. And so from a longevity standpoint, the data around astaxanthin is very rigorous. And so I would say better than pretty much any other supplement out there for longevity. Something like rapamycin, which is a repurposed drug, is probably more of a lifespan enhancing agent based on the data, but it doesn't necessarily have the health span or safety benefits that astaxanthin
Exactly.
looks to
Mhm.
have. And then when you get into antioxidant, astaxanthin actually has been shown to be much more potent in terms of scavenging singlet oxygen, which is a type of reactive oxygen species that's actually triggered by, say, in particular, sunlight. When sunlight hits your skin, it can sensitize certain molecules that react with oxygen and create this high energy state of oxygen that can damage your skin cells and your collagen and break down all these things. And astaxanthin can absorb that excess energy and vibrate it out, dissipate it out as heat, and do that over and over safely without damaging anything. So it's really powerful as a scavenger of singlet oxygen, thousands of times stronger than vitamin C and vitamin E and beta carotene. But like we talked about, it gets into the membranes in the perfect way, perfectly spans it, unlike any other antioxidants, and gets to all these membranes of the cells. So it's very different than a lot of antioxidants based on how it localizes in membranes and how powerful it is and fighting reactive oxygen species inside and outside the cells. And then finally, in the astaxanthin space, it's a long answer here, but just winding up.
Yeah.
In the
No, it's good.
astaxanthin space, there are different forms of astaxanthin. And we've worked across the spectrum. We've grown the micro, and it's kind of like high-tech PhD farming where you're growing microalgae in these ponds and tubes, and you're extracting as much of the astaxanthin out of the algae, but you're getting maybe 10% astaxanthin and then other stuff from the algae, other
Mhm.
lipids and proteins and carotenoids from the algae, which is not going to hurt you. It's just not the beneficial active ingredient that you're looking for with the astaxanthin. It can be prone to contamination from outside elements or batch to batch variability. We, on the pharmaceutical side, pursued laboratory production of astaxanthin to just get just the natural molecule itself without the other stuff from the algae, highly pure, highly consistent, and then a special formulation to make it really well absorbed. And we conducted a human study versus a leading form from the microalgae and gave a group of human volunteers a dose of the algal form with two 12 milligram capsules. And then we took their blood at multiple time points over 24 hours and then analyzed it to see how much astaxanthin actually got into the blood. And then sent them home for a week so that it would all wash out their system and there was no longer any astaxanthin measurable. Brought the same group of people back,
Yeah, people.
same group of people, same dose, but with our form, with the AX3 form that you showed. And we, again, measured their blood and we got 3 times the amount of the astaxanthin into the bloodstream. And it was more consistent person to person. So the
Wow.
formulation allowed so much more to get in. And so
Get
that's really
absorbed.
what sets it apart. In our case is that you have really high purity, really high bioavailability. And on top of that, you have the form that was actually tested in the NIH program. And you have data like the cardiovascular study that we conducted. So that was what sets us apart as a supplement. And so it should be as well known as fish oil or probiotics. And so if just people knew about astaxanthin and started
What it
taking
did,
it from any source, any quality source, that would be a great thing. And that would be our mission fulfilled. But we certainly know that in our case, we have a really pure and well-absorbed form. And so
Amazing.
that's what we're doing here. But
That's
yeah, we just
interesting.
want to help astaxanthin get a name for itself out there in the world.
Well, that's amazing. This is the form that you're talking about. That actually answered my last. I was going to say, if people take one thing away from this conversation, what would it be? You
Well,
said
hopefully just knowing about astaxanthin for the first time.
knowing
A lot of
about it.
people probably haven't heard of it and
No.
it can be hard to pronounce. And that's why we called it AX3, an abbreviation for astaxanthin
Yeah.
and 3 for the 3 times bioavailability. But yeah, it's something that you can call it ASTA for short as well, if that makes it easier. But I think it's really interesting because sometimes things sound great, but then when you look into it, you're wondering really where's all the data or the support for
And
it.
you've got the data. That's
But with
very key.
astaxanthin, yeah, there's so much data
Very
out there,
important.
and it can be overwhelming for people to go to PubMed and search for peer-reviewed papers, know how to read through those papers. But certainly, if people want to, the more you dig, the more interesting it is. And we have some of the top key opinion leaders, the top scientists and researchers in the world that have been really excited about what we're doing and what others are doing in the astaxanthin space as well. But now with the advances of AI and everything, it's actually pretty good. It used to be bad where you would ask a question to ChatGPT or whatever, and you may get hallucinations of made up studies. And it was very, concerning. And you have to say, don't make up the study, give me a real reference. But now apologize. Oh, I'm so sorry I made that up, which is very strange.
No,
But in the last year or so, I found that it's actually so much
little bit
more
better.
improved. And if you want to, if you are not, say, a PhD or MD that is typically used to reading peer-reviewed literature, if you want to go out and start on the AI engines and kind of ask questions about astaxanthin and how it impacts this area of health or that area of health, ask for the data in humans or maybe animals, and then also the mechanism of how it works, what it's doing, and how that's different than other agents, you can get a lot of really helpful information. Then you can go and look at the supporting studies thereafter. But the more you dig, the more interesting it is. And everyone involved so interested in this for so many years because there's just so much research that continues to grow. And it's just so interesting that it has these impacts on these fundamental roles of health and aging, because it's really working at these kind of upstream cellular level of oxidative stress and inflammation. So
thank you for that. And your passion is very obvious. And it's very exciting that we're learning more and more things to help with health span and longevity that do work. So thank you for your work. And it's the clinical studies that really got me interested. It's very solid and great. So thank you so much for joining us today and for giving us all your incredible knowledge and teaching us about this wonderful AX3 pure biopure S. Let me see if I can get the name. I don't know. I'm pretty good at pronunciation. And go get your astaxanthin. Thank you so much, David. It's been great chatting with you, and I look forward to seeing what the future brings with this product.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here and to speak with you. Thank you again.